The world had been bleeding for 37 years, ever since the first wave of the undead plague swept across continents like wildfire through dry grass. What remained of humanity clung to fortified settlements scattered across a landscape that nature was slowly reclaiming, where rusted vehicles served as monuments to a civilization that once ruled the earth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wasteland as Marcus Reed adjusted his binoculars, scanning the horizon from his perch atop the watchtower of Haven's Gate, the largest surviving human stronghold west of the Mississippi River. The settlement buzzed with controlled urgency below him, a testament to human adaptability and the will to survive against impossible odds. 3,000 souls called this place home, protected by towering walls constructed from salvaged materials and defended by volunteers who had learned that hesitation meant death. Marcus lowered his binoculars and rubbed his weathered face, feeling every one of his 42 years in his aching joints. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of his first encounter with what the survivors called runners, the faster, more aggressive variant of the undead that had emerged in recent years. Elena Vasquez emerged from the laboratory complex, her white coat stained with chemicals and exhaustion etched into her angular features. She had been working around the clock on what she called Project Lighthouse, though she remained tight-lipped about the details even with Marcus. Her team of 6 scientists represented some of the finest minds that had survived the apocalypse, refugees from universities and research facilities who had managed to escape the initial chaos. The makeshift laboratory occupied what used to be the town's community center, now filled with salvaged equipment and jury-rigged instruments that hummed with purpose. Young Jake Morrison sprinted through the settlement's main street, dodging between groups of children who still found ways to play despite the grim reality surrounding them. At 19, Jake possessed an almost supernatural ability to move unseen through zombie-infested territory, making him invaluable for reconnaissance missions that kept Haven's Gate informed about enemy movements. His latest patrol had revealed something troubling. The undead were exhibiting new behaviors, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a level of organization previously unseen. Commander Victoria Stone stood before a detailed map in the operations center, surrounded by her senior staff as they planned the next supply run to the abandoned city of New Memphis. The former Air Force colonel had assumed leadership of Haven's Gate after the previous commander fell during the Battle of Broken Bridge, and under her guidance, the settlement had not only survived but grown stronger. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her piercing blue eyes missed nothing as she studied intelligence reports from other human settlements. 20 miles to the east, in what used to be downtown St. Louis, something unprecedented was taking place among the zombie hordes. The creature that survivors would come to know as the Harbinger moved through the ruins with purpose, its decaying form somehow retaining echoes of the brilliant mind it had possessed in life. Unlike the mindless shambling masses, this evolved zombie could think, plan, and most terrifyingly, communicate with others of its kind. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its gray skin stretched taut over a frame that had grown stronger rather than weaker with undeath. Beth Williams sat hunched over her radio equipment in the communications bunker, adjusting frequencies and checking connections that linked Haven's Gate with 12 other human settlements across the region. Static filled the air, punctuated by coded messages that painted a picture of increasing zombie activity along all fronts. Her headphones crackled with urgent transmissions from Sanctuary Falls, a smaller outpost reporting unusual zombie behavior near their perimeter. Tyler Jackson cleaned his modified assault rifle with practiced efficiency, each movement precise and methodical. The weapons specialist had served alongside Marcus in the early days of the outbreak, and their friendship had been forged in the crucible of countless battles against the undead. His workshop occupied a corner of the settlement's armory, where he spent his days maintaining weapons and developing new ammunition types designed to maximize stopping power against their undead enemies. Dr. Amanda Foster finished suturing a wound on a young scavenger who had gotten too close to a zombie pack during a supply run. Her medical facility operated in what used to be the town's urgent care clinic, expanded with additional beds and equipment salvaged from hospitals throughout the region. She had seen every type of injury imaginable, from zombie bites that required immediate amputation to prevent infection, to the psychological trauma that came from losing loved ones to the undead plague. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded survivors of the fires that had consumed their old world, an ominous silence settled over the wasteland. The usual sounds of distant zombie moans and shuffling feet had ceased, replaced by an unnatural quiet that made even the most hardened survivors nervous. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that after years of predictable patterns, something fundamental was changing in the behavior of their undead enemies. The final war for control of Earth was about to begin in earnest, and neither side could afford to lose. The alarm bell's urgent clanging shattered the evening quiet at precisely 8:47 p.m., sending residents of Haven's Gate scrambling for their assigned positions along the settlement's defensive perimeter. Jake Morrison burst through the gates at a dead sprint, his chest heaving as he stumbled toward the guard station where Marcus Reed was already descending from the watchtower. The young scout's face was pale with exhaustion and something deeper, pure terror that came from witnessing something that defied all previous understanding of their undead enemies. His hands shook as he grabbed Marcus by the shoulders, his voice hoarse from running the final 5 miles without stopping to catch his breath. The zombie horde approaching from the southeast numbered in the thousands, but that wasn't what had driven Jake to push his endurance beyond its limits during his desperate race back to the settlement. These undead moved with purpose and coordination that shouldn't have been possible, advancing in organized formations that resembled military tactics rather than the usual mindless shuffling that survivors had learned to predict and counter. The Harbinger walked at the center of the mass, its towering form clearly visible even from a distance, and Jake swore he could see intelligence burning in its dead eyes like cold fire in the growing darkness. Elena Vasquez abandoned her experiments as the evacuation protocols activated throughout the laboratory complex, her team of scientists working frantically to secure their research materials before fleeing to the designated safe zones. Project Lighthouse represented months of painstaking work that could potentially turn the tide of the war, but none of it would matter if they couldn't survive the next few hours. She clutched a sealed metal case containing their most critical data as explosions echoed from the eastern wall, where the first wave of zombies had begun their assault on Haven's Gate's supposedly impregnable defenses. Commander Victoria Stone's voice cut through the chaos over the settlement's public address system, her words steady and authoritative despite the magnitude of the threat bearing down on them. 23 years of military service had prepared her for moments like this, when clear thinking and decisive action meant the difference between survival and annihilation. The emergency protocols she had implemented during her first year of leadership were now being put to their ultimate test, as 3,000 civilians looked to her for guidance while facing an enemy that had somehow learned to think and plan. Tyler Jackson's workshop became a frenzied armory as volunteers grabbed every available weapon, from his modified assault rifles to makeshift explosives constructed from salvaged materials. The weapons specialist had always known this day would come, when sheer firepower would be all that stood between humanity and extinction. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he distributed ammunition and shouted instructions to fighters who had never faced anything like the approaching horde, their faces reflecting the same mixture of determination and fear that had become humanity's constant companion. The first breach came at the northeastern corner where the wall had been weakened by previous attacks, concrete and steel buckling under the coordinated assault of hundreds of zombies working together with impossible synchronization. Dr. Amanda Foster could hear the sounds of battle growing closer as she prepared the medical facility for what she knew would be a night of unprecedented casualties. Her makeshift hospital would become a critical lifeline for those lucky enough to survive encounters with an enemy that had evolved beyond their worst nightmares, and she steeled herself for the horrors that lay ahead. Beth Williams maintained her position in the communications bunker, sending desperate messages to neighboring settlements while coordinating with the few remaining military outposts scattered across the region. The radio chatter painted a terrifying picture of similar coordinated attacks happening simultaneously across hundreds of miles, suggesting a level of zombie organization that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about their undead enemies. Static-filled responses from Sanctuary Falls and New Eden indicated that Haven's Gate wasn't facing this nightmare alone, but the knowledge offered little comfort as explosions shook the bunker's reinforced walls. The Harbinger's influence spread through the zombie ranks like a virus of intelligence, each undead creature suddenly moving with purpose that transcended their individual hunger for human flesh. This evolved zombie leader had retained enough of its human memories to understand military strategy, and it applied these concepts with ruthless efficiency as it directed the assault on Haven's Gate. The settlement's defenders found themselves facing an enemy that could adapt, learn, and counter their tactics in real time, turning every advantage they had gained through years of experience into potential weaknesses. Marcus Reed stood atop the central command post, watching his home come under siege from an enemy that had transformed overnight from mindless predators into organized warriors. The weight of leadership pressed down on him as he realized that traditional defensive strategies would be useless against zombies that could think and plan. Around him, the sounds of battle intensified as the settlement's outer defenses began to crumble under sustained assault, and he knew that the next few hours would determine whether Haven's Gate would survive to see another dawn, or join the countless other human settlements that had fallen to the zombie plague over the past 37 years of endless war. The eastern wall collapsed in a thunderous cascade of concrete and twisted metal at 11:23 p.m., creating a breach wide enough for dozens of zombies to pour through simultaneously while defenders scrambled to establish secondary defensive positions deeper within the settlement. Elena Vasquez clutched her research case tighter as she ran through darkened corridors toward the emergency evacuation tunnels, her mind racing with possibilities that Project Lighthouse might represent humanity's final hope against an enemy that had evolved beyond their worst predictions. The laboratory explosion behind her illuminated the night sky in brilliant orange, destroying months of secondary research but hopefully buying precious time for the civilians fleeing toward the underground passages that connected Haven's Gate to 3 separate exit points miles away from the main settlement. Tyler Jackson's modified barricades held the inner courtyard for exactly 17 minutes before the coordinated zombie assault overwhelmed his defensive positions, forcing him to fall back toward the central command structure while covering the retreat of families with young children who moved too slowly to outrun their undead pursuers. His experimental ammunition proved devastatingly effective against individual zombies, but the sheer numbers pressing through multiple breach points made every shot count in a deadly mathematics of survival where miscalculation meant immediate death for everyone he had sworn to protect. The weapons specialist's voice cracked over the radio as he called for concentrated fire support at grid reference Charlie 7, where a group of evolved zombies had begun systematically dismantling the settlement's power grid with an understanding of infrastructure that chilled him to his core. Commander Victoria Stone coordinated the fighting withdrawal from her mobile command post, a converted armored vehicle that moved between defensive positions while maintaining communication with scattered units across the settlement. Her tactical experience proved invaluable as she recognized the zombie assault patterns and adapted human responses in real time, but even her military expertise couldn't overcome the fundamental problem of fighting an enemy that learned from every encounter and shared that knowledge instantaneously across the entire horde. The evacuation of non-combatants proceeded according to protocol, but Stone knew that saving 3,000 people would require sacrifices from the volunteer defenders who were buying time with their lives against impossible odds. Jake Morrison found himself trapped in the settlement's northeastern sector when the zombie advance cut off his route to the main evacuation tunnels, forcing him to rely on his exceptional stealth skills to navigate through undead patrols that moved with military precision through streets he had known since childhood. The young scout's intimate knowledge of Haven's Gate's hidden passages and maintenance tunnels became his only advantage against zombies that seemed to anticipate every conventional escape route. His radio crackled with desperate messages from other isolated survivors, but Jake knew that attempting rescues would only result in more casualties among people who trusted him to find alternative solutions to seemingly hopeless situations. Dr. Amanda Foster refused to abandon her patients despite direct orders to evacuate, working frantically to stabilize wounded defenders who had been carried to her medical facility during brief lulls in the fighting. The makeshift hospital had become a beacon of hope for injured civilians, but its location near the settlement center also made it a strategic target for zombies that seemed to understand the psychological impact of destroying humanity's compassionate institutions. Her medical team worked by emergency lighting as power fluctuated throughout the settlement, performing life-saving procedures while the sounds of battle drew steadily closer to their reinforced doors. The Harbinger moved through the conquered sections of Haven's Gate with deliberate purpose, its enhanced intelligence allowing it to identify and prioritize targets that would maximize psychological damage to the surviving human defenders. This evolved zombie leader understood that breaking human morale was more effective than simply overwhelming them with numbers, and it directed its forces to capture rather than kill certain individuals whose expertise might prove useful for expanding zombie capabilities. The creature's strategic thinking represented an evolutionary leap that transformed the undead from mere predators into an organized army capable of long-term planning and complex military operations. Beth Williams maintained her communication post even as explosions shook the bunker's walls, sending updates to regional settlements while coordinating with military remnants that might provide reinforcement or evacuation support for Haven's Gate survivors. The radio traffic revealed that similar coordinated attacks were succeeding across the entire region, with established human strongholds falling one by one to zombie forces that had somehow achieved unprecedented levels of organization and tactical sophistication. Her equipment detected encrypted transmissions between zombie groups, suggesting a communication network that spanned hundreds of miles and allowed for real-time coordination of multiple simultaneous assaults on human targets. Marcus Reed made the hardest decision of his life as he realized that saving Haven's Gate as a settlement was impossible, but saving its people might still be achievable through strategic retreat and coordinated evacuation efforts. The former military commander activated the settlement's final contingency protocol, a plan that had been developed but never tested, which involved systematically destroying critical infrastructure to deny its use to zombie forces while creating diversions that would allow maximum civilian evacuation through the underground tunnel network. His voice remained steady over the radio as he issued orders that would essentially surrender their home to save their lives, knowing that 3,000 people were depending on his ability to transform catastrophic defeat into tactical withdrawal that preserved humanity's most valuable resource, the survivors themselves who carried the knowledge, skills, and determination necessary to continue the fight against an enemy that had evolved into something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined possible. The underground tunnels that had taken 2 years to construct became lifelines for nearly 2,000 evacuees who crawled through darkness toward freedom, their movements guided by emergency lighting systems that Jake Morrison had activated remotely before making his own desperate escape through maintenance shafts that ran parallel to the main evacuation routes. The young scout's intimate knowledge of Haven's Gate's hidden infrastructure proved invaluable as he guided groups of separated civilians toward tunnel entrances that the zombies hadn't yet discovered, his radio providing crucial updates to other survivors about safe passages and areas to avoid. The tunnel system had been designed to handle 500 people maximum, but desperation drove families to squeeze through spaces never intended for mass evacuation while the sounds of destruction echoed through concrete walls that seemed increasingly fragile against the methodical zombie assault above their heads. Elena Vasquez found herself leading a group of 47 survivors through the Western Tunnel network, her scientific mind calculating oxygen consumption rates and structural integrity while trying to maintain morale among civilians who had lost everything they had worked decades to build. Project Lighthouse's research data weighed heavily in her backpack, representing potential salvation for humanity if she could reach one of the remaining research facilities scattered across the wasteland. The tunnel's emergency ventilation system struggled to provide adequate air circulation for the overcrowded passage, forcing difficult decisions about rest stops and movement pace that balanced survival against the risk of zombie discovery of their escape route. Tyler Jackson's rearguard action bought precious minutes for the evacuation as he and 12 volunteer defenders held strategic choke points throughout the settlement, using demolition charges and concentrated firepower to collapse buildings and create obstacles that slowed the zombie advance toward the tunnel entrances. His modified weapons proved their worth in close-quarters combat, but ammunition limitations meant that every shot had to count in a defensive action that was ultimately doomed to failure. The weapons specialist's final radio transmission directed surviving defenders toward predetermined rally points outside the settlement, where cached supplies and transportation waited for those who managed to escape the systematic destruction of their home. Commander Victoria Stone coordinated multiple evacuation streams from her mobile command post until a coordinated zombie assault forced her to abandon the vehicle and continue operations on foot through the settlement's burning districts. Her tactical expertise became crucial for organizing scattered survivors into cohesive groups that could support each other during the dangerous journey through hostile territory toward backup settlements located 60 miles to the northwest. The former Air Force colonel's leadership skills were tested beyond anything her military training had prepared her for, as she balanced the immediate needs of evacuation with longer-term strategic considerations about where 3,000 refugees could find shelter and resources. The Harbinger's forces systematically explored the abandoned sections of Haven's Gate, the evolved zombie leader demonstrating an understanding of human psychology by preserving certain buildings while destroying others in patterns designed to demoralize any survivors who might witness the settlement's transformation. The creature's enhanced intelligence allowed it to deduce the existence of evacuation tunnels from architectural clues and human behavioral patterns, leading to organized search efforts that threatened to trap evacuees still moving through the underground network. Its ability to communicate with zombie forces across vast distances meant that other undead groups were already positioning themselves along likely escape routes, turning the evacuation into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Dr. Amanda Foster's evacuation group included 38 wounded survivors who required continuous medical attention during their underground journey, creating logistical challenges that tested her resourcefulness and medical expertise under impossible conditions. The makeshift stretchers and medical supplies she had managed to salvage from her clinic became life-saving resources for people who couldn't survive the journey without ongoing treatment. Her group moved slower than others due to their medical needs, but her knowledge of human anatomy and emergency medicine proved invaluable for treating injuries sustained during the chaotic evacuation through cramped tunnel spaces never designed for wounded civilians. Beth Williams dismantled her communication equipment systematically, destroying sensitive technology while preserving critical components that could be used to re-establish contact with other human settlements once the evacuation was complete. Her final broadcasts provided other regional strongholds with detailed intelligence about zombie capabilities and coordination methods, information that might prove crucial for defending against similar attacks. The communication specialists' technical expertise became essential for coordinating between separated evacuation groups and maintaining contact with the outside world during humanity's darkest hour. Marcus Reed emerged from the tunnel system as dawn broke over the devastated landscape, leading a group of 230 survivors toward the predetermined rally point where other evacuation groups were already beginning to assemble. The sight of Haven's Gate burning in the distance served as a stark reminder of how quickly their fortified home had fallen to an enemy that had evolved beyond their ability to predict or counter. His leadership would be tested in new ways as nearly 3,000 homeless survivors looked to him for guidance about their uncertain future, while zombie forces that had demonstrated unprecedented intelligence and organization continued to hunt them across a wasteland that offered few places to hide from an enemy that could think, plan, and communicate across vast distances with terrifying efficiency. The makeshift refugee camp at Devil's Canyon consisted of torn tarps, salvaged vehicles, and desperate people who had managed to carry only essential supplies during their harrowing escape from Haven's Gate, creating a temporary settlement that could barely sustain 3,000 survivors for more than a few days without additional resources or permanent shelter. Elena Vasquez worked frantically to establish a new laboratory using equipment salvaged from the evacuation, her Project Lighthouse research representing humanity's best hope for developing weapons capable of countering the evolved zombie threat. The rocky canyon provided natural defensive advantages, but everyone understood that their current position was merely a breathing space before the next phase of their struggle for survival against an enemy that had demonstrated the ability to coordinate attacks across hundreds of miles with military precision. Jake Morrison's scouting reports painted a grim picture of zombie forces systematically searching the surrounding territory, their organized patrol patterns indicating that the Harbinger's influence had transformed random zombie movements into methodical hunting expeditions designed to track down escaped human survivors. The young scouts' reconnaissance missions revealed that traditional survival tactics were becoming obsolete as zombies adapted their behavior to counter human strategies that had worked effectively for decades. His discovery of zombie communication networks spanning vast distances suggested that the undead had developed technological capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of the remaining human settlements scattered across the post-apocalyptic landscape. Commander Victoria Stone established command protocols for the refugee camp while coordinating with other regional settlements that might provide temporary shelter or resources for the displaced population of Haven's Gate. Her military experience proved crucial for organizing 3,000 panicked civilians into functional groups that could contribute to their collective survival through specialized tasks ranging from perimeter security to resource management. The radio communications with New Eden Settlement and Sanctuary Falls revealed that similar zombie attacks were occurring across the entire region, suggesting a coordinated campaign designed to eliminate human strongholds systematically rather than the random predation patterns that had characterized zombie behavior for the past 37 years. Tyler Jackson's weapons cache at the rally point provided armed resistance capabilities for the refugee population, but ammunition shortages and limited manufacturing resources meant that any future confrontations with zombie forces would require careful tactical planning rather than the overwhelming firepower that had previously kept human settlements secure. The weapons specialist worked with volunteer defenders to establish training programs that could transform civilian survivors into effective fighters, knowing that their survival depended on every able-bodied person's ability to contribute to defensive operations against an enemy that had evolved beyond their worst nightmares. His modified ammunition designs showed promise against evolved zombies, but producing sufficient quantities would require access to manufacturing facilities that might no longer exist in their current territory. Dr. Amanda Foster established a field medical station using supplies salvaged from Haven's Gate, treating not only physical injuries sustained during the evacuation but also the psychological trauma that came from witnessing their home's destruction by an enemy that had demonstrated intelligence and strategic thinking capabilities. Her patient load included dozens of civilians suffering from exposure, exhaustion, and injuries sustained during the underground evacuation, creating medical challenges that tested her resourcefulness in an environment with limited supplies and equipment. The doctor's expertise became essential for maintaining the health and morale of a refugee population that faced uncertain futures while being hunted by zombie forces that seemed to understand human weaknesses and exploit them systematically. Beth Williams re-established communication networks using equipment salvaged during the evacuation, her technical expertise proving crucial for maintaining contact with other human settlements and coordinating potential evacuation or resupply operations. The radio intercepts she had recorded during Haven's Gate's fall provided valuable intelligence about zombie communication methods and organizational structures that might be exploited by human forces if they could develop appropriate countermeasures. Her work revealed that the zombie communication network extended far beyond their immediate region, suggesting a level of coordination that transformed the undead from scattered threats into a unified force capable of strategic planning on a continental scale. The Harbinger's forces continued their systematic search for human survivors, the evolved zombie leader's intelligence allowing it to predict likely evacuation routes and establish ambush positions that threatened any movement between remaining human settlements. The creature's understanding of human psychology and tactical thinking made it a formidable opponent that could anticipate and counter traditional survival strategies that had kept humanity alive during the initial decades of the zombie apocalypse. Its ability to coordinate multiple zombie groups across vast distances created a strategic nightmare for human leaders who found their conventional military tactics ineffective against an enemy that could adapt and learn from every encounter. Elena's preliminary analysis of Project Lighthouse data suggested that biological countermeasures might be possible, but developing and deploying such weapons would require resources and time that the refugee population might not have while being actively hunted by organized zombie forces. Her research indicated that the zombie evolution represented a fundamental shift in the nature of the threat facing humanity, requiring completely new approaches to survival and defense that went far beyond the fortification and firepower strategies that had worked against mindless undead hordes. The scientists' work offered hope for eventual victory, but the immediate challenge remained finding a way to keep 3,000 refugees alive long enough to develop and implement solutions that could turn the tide of a war that humanity was currently losing to an enemy that had learned to think, plan, and coordinate their attacks with devastating effectiveness against human settlements that had grown complacent after decades of fighting predictable foes. The discovery of the abandoned military research facility at Mount Harrison came through Beth Williams' intercepted radio transmissions, revealing a pre-war installation that might contain the resources and equipment necessary for Elena's Project Lighthouse to reach completion before zombie forces located and destroyed their temporary refuge at Devil's Canyon. Jake Morrison's reconnaissance mission to the facility confirmed that the underground complex remained intact and unoccupied, but reaching it would require a dangerous 40-mile journey through territory now patrolled by coordinated zombie forces that had learned to anticipate human movement patterns. The facility's automated defense systems were still operational after nearly 4 decades, suggesting that its power sources and technological infrastructure might provide the advanced laboratory capabilities that Elena needed to develop biological weapons capable of countering the evolved zombie threat. Marcus Reed faced an impossible decision as he weighed the risks of moving 3,000 vulnerable refugees against the potential rewards of accessing military-grade research equipment that could provide humanity with its first real advantage against the Harbinger's forces. The journey to Mount Harrison would expose the entire refugee population to zombie attacks during multiple days of travel across open terrain, but remaining at Devil's Canyon guaranteed eventual discovery and annihilation by enemy forces that were systematically searching every possible hiding place. His leadership council included Elena, Commander Stone, Tyler Jackson, and Dr. Foster, each bringing different perspectives to a strategic decision that would determine whether the survivors of Haven's Gate would live to see humanity's potential victory or die in a desperate gamble for resources they might not be able to use effectively even if they reached them safely. Commander Victoria Stone's tactical analysis revealed that the zombie search patterns had evolved beyond simple area sweeps, incorporating psychological warfare designed to force human survivors into making desperate moves that would expose them to coordinated attacks by multiple undead groups working in perfect synchronization. Her military experience suggested that the Harbinger possessed strategic thinking capabilities that rivaled those of the finest human commanders, making traditional evasion tactics ineffective against an enemy that could predict and counter human decision-making processes. The route to Mount Harrison would require diversionary operations and sacrificial rearguard actions that would inevitably result in casualties among people who had already lost everything they had built during decades of survival in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Tyler Jackson's weapons inventory revealed that the refugee population possessed enough firepower for perhaps 2 major engagements before ammunition shortages would render them defenseless against zombie forces that seemed to grow stronger and more coordinated with each passing day. His modified ammunition had proven effective against individual evolved zombies, but the quantities required for protecting 3,000 civilians during a 40-mile journey exceeded their current manufacturing capabilities by factors that made success seem mathematically impossible. The weapons specialist proposed a desperate strategy involving small teams of volunteers who would serve as mobile distraction forces, drawing zombie attention away from the main refugee column while sacrificing their own lives to buy time for the majority to reach potential safety. Dr. Amanda Foster's medical assessment of the refugee population revealed that nearly 400 people were too injured, elderly, or sick to survive the rigorous journey to Mount Harrison, creating ethical dilemmas about abandoning the most vulnerable members of their community to save those with better chances of survival. Her field hospital had stabilized most of the critically wounded evacuees from Haven's Gate, but the stress and exposure of continuous movement would certainly result in additional casualties among people whose immune systems had been compromised by trauma and inadequate nutrition. The doctor's expertise would be crucial during the journey, but her commitment to saving every possible life conflicted with tactical decisions that prioritized the survival of the group over the needs of individuals who might slow down the entire evacuation effort. Elena Vasquez's analysis of the Mount Harrison facility's technical specifications suggested that Project Lighthouse could be completed within 3 weeks if her research team could access the installation's advanced laboratory equipment and biological research materials. Her work on zombie tissue samples had revealed genetic markers that might be exploited to develop targeted pathogens capable of disrupting the neural networks that allowed evolved zombies to maintain their enhanced intelligence and coordination capabilities. The scientists' breakthrough represented humanity's first real hope for victory, but reaching the facility would require surviving a journey that would expose them to every zombie group within a 100-mile radius while carrying research materials too valuable to lose but too fragile to survive combat conditions. The Harbinger's intelligence network detected increased human activity around Devil's Canyon through surveillance methods that remained mysterious but devastatingly effective, leading to intensified search operations that brought zombie patrols closer to the refugee camp each day. The evolved zombie leader's strategic thinking had adapted to human psychology, using fear and uncertainty as weapons that were often more effective than direct assault in forcing survivors to make mistakes that exposed them to destruction. Its communication network had expanded to include zombie groups from neighboring states, creating a coordinated enemy force numbering in the hundreds of thousands that could converge on any human settlement within days of its discovery. Jake Morrison's final reconnaissance report before the planned departure revealed that zombie forces had begun establishing permanent outposts along major travel routes, transforming the landscape into a strategic nightmare where human movement could be detected and intercepted by enemy forces that possessed both the patience to wait for optimal attack opportunities and the intelligence to coordinate complex ambush operations. The young scout's expertise in stealth movement would be crucial for guiding the refugee column through territory that had become increasingly hostile, but even his exceptional skills might not be sufficient to hide 3,000 people from an enemy that had learned to think like humans while retaining all the physical advantages that made zombies nearly unstoppable in direct confrontation. The journey to Mount Harrison represented humanity's last desperate gamble for survival, requiring them to risk everything they had managed to save from Haven's Gate's destruction in pursuit of a scientific breakthrough that might never come or might arrive too late to save a species that was running out of time, places to hide, and reasons to hope for victory against an enemy that had evolved beyond their ability to comprehend or effectively counter with conventional strategies that had kept them alive for nearly 4 decades of constant warfare. The march toward Mount Harrison began at dawn on the 7th day after Haven's Gate's destruction, with 3,000 refugees moving in carefully coordinated columns designed to minimize their visibility while maximizing their defensive capabilities against zombie forces that Marcus Reed knew were watching their every movement from concealed positions throughout the wasteland. Tyler Jackson's volunteer distraction teams had departed hours earlier, their mission to create diversions that would draw zombie attention away from the main refugee column during the most vulnerable phases of the 40-mile journey across territory that offered minimal cover and numerous opportunities for coordinated ambush attacks. The weapons specialist's sacrifice strategy had attracted 47 volunteers who understood that their role as mobile bait would likely result in their deaths, but their desperate courage might buy enough time for the majority to reach potential salvation at the abandoned military facility. Elena Vasquez traveled near the center of the column with her research materials protected by the settlement's most experienced fighters, her scientific work representing humanity's only realistic hope for developing weapons capable of countering the evolved zombie threat that had demonstrated devastating effectiveness against traditional human defensive strategies. The portable laboratory equipment she had managed to salvage from Haven's Gate represented years of accumulated research into zombie biology and behavior patterns, knowledge that might prove crucial for completing Project Lighthouse if they could reach the Mount Harrison facility's advanced research capabilities. Her analysis of zombie tissue samples continued during rest stops, revealing genetic abnormalities that suggested the creature's enhanced intelligence came at significant metabolic costs that might be exploited through targeted biological agents. Commander Victoria Stone coordinated the refugee movement from mobile command positions that shifted throughout the column, her tactical expertise proving essential for maintaining order and discipline among 3,000 frightened civilians who had never faced dangers comparable to their current situation. The former Air Force colonel's military experience helped her anticipate zombie tactical responses and adjust human movement patterns accordingly, but she understood that their enemy's strategic thinking capabilities made conventional evasion tactics increasingly obsolete with each passing hour. Her radio communications with the volunteer distraction teams provided real-time intelligence about zombie movements and coordination patterns that helped guide route decisions for the main refugee column. Jake Morrison moved ahead of the main column as an advanced scout, his exceptional stealth skills allowing him to identify zombie positions and coordinate with Tyler's distraction teams to create safe passage corridors for the vulnerable refugee population. The young scout's intimate knowledge of wasteland terrain proved invaluable for finding routes that avoided known zombie outposts while maintaining progress toward their destination, but the enemy's adaptive intelligence meant that safe passages could become deadly traps within hours if zombie forces detected their movement patterns. His radio reports revealed that zombie patrols had increased in frequency and sophistication, suggesting that the Harbinger's influence continued to expand and strengthen with each passing day. The Harbinger itself appeared on a distant ridgeline during the second day of travel, its towering form clearly visible to refugee scouts who reported that the evolved zombie leader seemed to be observing their movement with analytical interest rather than immediate aggressive intent. The creature's presence created psychological pressure among the civilian population, but its apparent restraint suggested strategic thinking that prioritized understanding human capabilities over immediate destruction of the refugee column. Dr. Amanda Foster noted increased stress-related medical issues among civilians who spotted the harbinger, but the creature's distant observation provided valuable intelligence about zombie leadership hierarchy and decision-making processes that might be exploited if they survived to complete Elena's research. Beth Williams maintained communications with remaining human settlements while coordinating with the volunteer distraction teams, her technical expertise proving crucial for managing information flow between scattered groups operating across hundreds of square miles of hostile territory. The radio intercepts she monitored revealed that zombie forces were indeed coordinating their response to human movement, but the complexity of managing simultaneous operations seemed to strain even the Harbinger's enhanced capabilities when faced with multiple simultaneous threats requiring different tactical responses. Her work suggested that overwhelming zombie coordination networks with too many simultaneous demands might create opportunities for human survival and eventual victory. Tyler Jackson's distraction operations proved devastatingly effective during the first 3 days of travel, with his volunteer teams managing to draw significant zombie forces away from the main refugee column's route while inflicting casualties that disrupted enemy coordination in key sectors. The weapons specialists' modified ammunition demonstrated superior effectiveness against evolved zombies, but the limited quantities available meant that each engagement had to achieve maximum tactical advantage through precise targeting and coordinated team actions. His radio reports grew increasingly desperate as ammunition ran low and zombie forces adapted to counter his tactical innovations, but the distraction team's sacrifice was buying precious time for the main column to approach their destination. Dr. Amanda Foster's mobile medical unit treated injuries and illnesses that developed during the grueling march, her expertise proving essential for maintaining the health and morale of a refugee population subjected to extreme physical and psychological stress. The field medical procedures she performed during brief rest stops helped keep the most vulnerable refugees mobile enough to continue the journey, but her supplies dwindled rapidly while treating conditions ranging from exhaustion and malnutrition to infected wounds sustained during the evacuation from Haven's Gate. Her work revealed that the refugee population's overall health was deteriorating rapidly, making time a critical factor in reaching Mount Harrison before medical emergencies began claiming lives that might otherwise be saved. The final approach to Mount Harrison revealed that the facility's automated defense systems were indeed operational, but gaining access would require technical expertise and coordination that might expose the entire refugee population to zombie forces that had been following their movement from carefully maintained distances throughout the dangerous journey. Marcus Reed's leadership faced its ultimate test as 3,000 exhausted and frightened people looked to him for guidance while standing within sight of potential salvation that might prove as deadly as the enemy forces pursuing them across a wasteland where humanity's survival depended on scientific breakthroughs that existed only in theory and the desperate courage of people who had already lost everything they had ever worked to build, during decades of struggle against an apocalyptic world that seemed determined to erase every trace of human civilization from the face of a dying planet.